Live stream. Come on, let's do this. I think let's see, are we back on? Hopefully we're
I have a
back.
note on my computer that says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. So I think we might be live.
We are, yes. All right, we're
Yay,
back.
we're back.
Yeah. 2024 and it's not been too kind so far. So, sorry about that. Thank you everyone for staying with us. Sorry, Tom, about cutting you off mid-speech, but you were in Ben Franklin, the two houses. We can start from.
I thought I was gonna have a big hook, like grab me and pull me off the stage. I thought that was the sign. Maybe I was talking too much.
No, no, not at all. The internet's been iffy all weekend because of the snow and ice storm here, but I'm not sure why it's affecting. This is why I do history, not technology. So, um, but
Things happen, things happen. But I was just telling you about Ben Franklin, but I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on Ben Franklin. What's your high level opinion of him?
so I for Ben Franklin, I feel like most of his work comes kind of even prior to the American Revolution, like you were kind of uh, hinting or talking about earlier, when he's serving as representative over what the colony of Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, and he sits there and he basically just gets ripped to shreds by a parliamentary committee and so forth, and or he understands what they perceive in Paris, France, about uh, with American perspective, the coonskin cap and so forth, and playing the rustic frontiersman. So he understands a little bit about it is optics sometimes um, for the to show the American colonies. Even prior to that, his first interaction with George Washington during the French and Indian War, when John Forbes uses his road and Franklin's able to provide wagons and so forth um, for what happened. So um, it's he's an amazing gentleman that actually by the end of his life is not very well liked in the colonies or in the states as well because of some of his anti-slavery points of view. And I think he has actually more eulogies in France than he does um, in the United States. So they really revere him overseas, and so he's kind of like a fine wine. He ages gracefully as he does through. So that's kind of my general thoughts about Ben
Yeah,
Franklin there.
he was one of those brilliant men, and as I said, his time was pre-American Revolution for the most part. He was gone 18 years, most of 18 years overseas, and so he wasn't there for a lot of the Stamp Act crisis and the Townsend Acts and Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party stuff. He came back. They were skeptical that a guy that could be gone that much time and over in England would come back. But it didn't take long at the Second Continental Congress for people to realize that he was all in with the American cause. It's interesting in I think it's 1774, 1775. He really came around to I'm sorry, that's not correct. It was after he read John Dickinson's book, Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, 1768. He started to come around to the way of thinking that an argument could be made for Parliament having the right to pass all laws and Parliament having the right to pass no laws. And he felt both arguments were sound, but he couldn't see any middle ground. And I think he stated in his autobiography at that point, he decided it had to be independence in America. It was the only course of action, long-term course of action. It just that middle ground, so it wasn't going to satisfy anybody. And but then another few years passed before he came back to the States. But he was all in when he came back.
And also, you take into account that his son was royal loyal governor. There's a tongue twister of New Jersey, and the separation there of his family and so forth. Then later on, I think it's actually grandchild or relation that actually um, will kind of go after be one of the first political columnists that go after George Washington's administration. So
That's right. That's
just
right.
like his ancestor who wrote the satire in Boston, which what something Doolittle, or I think was
Oh,
Ben Franklin's
Silence Dogood.
Do Good. There it is, Silas
Back
Do
back
Good.
in the day in Boston, Cotton Mather, the Mather family was very they're Puritans that they had a great following there. As a young apprentice to his brother James, Ben wanted to write some stories. His brother said, "You're too young. You don't know what you're doing. You can't write them." So Ben Franklin pens these articles under the pseudonym of Silence Dogood, kind of a take on the some of the church leaders who he felt were too good to be true, and slipped them under the door of the press run by his brother. He doesn't know who wrote the article, so he runs all the articles for about 6 months. Turns out it's young Ben, and as soon as he found out, he put a stop to that. But Silence Dogood, that's who it was.
Silas Do Good. Yeah,
His
I
first
was
pen name.
had the name going around the head. I couldn't get the right words together, but just a kind of a cool, amazing younger brother story there. Everything. So
Yeah, and then of course we were talking about the book and the other two guys, George Washington. George Washington was uh, everybody has sung his accolades for years for good reason. He's really an indispensable man. It's not my phrase, obviously, other people came up with that, but he really was the indispensable man. I don't see America being what it is without George Washington, and I don't think I could say that about anybody else. What are your thoughts about that, Phil?
yeah, I think I mean, just was reading something recently about Washington and that he's not a major talker. Obviously, he's not doesn't have these big speeches, but it's the actions, the little things that he does. Near the end of the war, the Newburgh with the Newburgh conspiracy, talking about that, or understanding at Valley Forge, where the Conway Cabal or the
Yep.
politicalness of it. It's also understanding attracting great young talent around him, knowing that he doesn't have to be the smartest book guy in the room. With John Lawrence, Alexander Hamilton, the Marquis de Lafayette, understanding that. Um, he also understands. I mean, one of the things I think he greatly gets underestimated for is his actual reserve. I mean, you read some of the times like the letters between Charles Lee and Joseph Reed about how he's basically an imbecile, and I mean that he doesn't lose his temper there, or he doesn't even really lose his temper as he's explained at Monmouth on one of the hottest days of the year. Now, people who say he does aren't around, and it's afterwards the letter writing and so forth. So I think one of the most impressive things is Washington's reserve, knowing that he is kind of the marble man, but he understands his own limitations. That's what I think makes it impressive. And then he not only resigns power once, but twice.
Yeah.
And that's just, I've read one account one time that when the United States was trying to figure out a democracy, they had three examples in world history. Greece, Rome, and then France was a democracy for about 20 minutes between the Directorate and Napoleon. And so those are your examples right there from what the Americans had to go after. And so, yeah, Washington is that Marvel man. If you pull the myths away, he's even greater than what the myths, I think, claim he is.
Yeah, you're right. And it went on 8 years as commander in chief, 8 years as the first president. There's nobody to follow, no precedent to follow, and to surrender power twice, quite remarkable. To his crossing of the Delaware, in my opinion, nothing against Saratoga, but the crossing of the Delaware, that single moment, and the successful conclusion of the Battle of Trenton. Without that, nothing else really happens. I don't think Princeton doesn't happen, and then what happens up in New York, it's not that the army would have dissolved. There wouldn't have been an army left to fight. So quite remarkable. Just
Oh,
really, yeah.
And Mark Malloy will be very happy that you said that that was a turning or momentous occasion. He's always saying that is the linchpin that holds the American Revolution together. Is there's 10 crucial days of crossing the Delaware, but also, once again, we don't know what he really says word by word, but to get the army to stay a few extra days, and I think
Yep.
people forget how remarkable that is. I mean, these guys have just survived New York, the retreat across New Jersey. I mean, they're starving, they're barefooted. They got the
Yep.
chance to go home, and they go, you know what? We'll give this guy a few more days.
Yep.
Um, I don't. That's impressive. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
And then you get to the third guy. I did it kind of by birth dates. That's how I kind of ordered the book. And you get to John Adams, who, in my opinion, is the most understated founding father there is. John Adams, and I'm going to get on my John Adams bandwagon here because he was remarkable. John Adams was just devoted to this country, um, probably more so than anyone else except for George Washington. And John Adams largely ran the Second Continental Congress. He gave us George Washington. He's the one that nominated him. He nominated Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence, even though John Adams was a prolific writer and loved writing, was a good writer. Uh, but he needed Virginia because up until that point, Massachusetts had been the Revolution. Boston Massacre, the Tea Party, the siege of Boston, and they needed Virginia. And he names Thomas Jefferson, recognizing that whatever Declaration of Independence said, it was going to be one for the ages. And it could have been him, but it was never about John Adams. It was about the United States. Uh, and then he serves on 90 committees, 90 at the Second Continental Congress. He chaired 25 of them. He almost worked himself to death, and he did it all for the country that he loved. He's responsible for making the vote unanimous. He just pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. Um, Benjamin Rush famously said that John Adams was the first man in the House, and he was. And people lose sight of the fact that the start of our country happened in that little room in Philadelphia, and John Adams was the man that mostly made it happen. Then you move forward a few years, and John Adams was a diplomat. Now, John Adams was not diplomatic, but he was a diplomat for 10 years, and he worked tirelessly. Uh, Franklin got the Treaty of Amity and commerce with France. That's true. But John Adams got the second treaty, and that one was with the Netherlands, the Dutch. He got a loan from them, 2 million guilders. He got the second country to recognize this. He races back from accomplishing that, comes back to Paris, where Franklin and Vergennes are dilly-dallying on the Treaty of Paris. John Jay jumps in and says he's going to start doing it on his own. He asks John Adams to help him. And Adams and Jay largely get us the terms that we see in the Treaty of Paris. Vergennes wanted the boundary to end at the crest of the Appalachians. All that land that George Rogers Clark had won for us, that's coming in book 2, by the way, what was Northwest Territory. Vergennes wanted to give that back to England and make it still part of the province of Quebec, which it was because of the Quebec Act of 1774. And he wanted Spain to have nominal control over this Indian territory west of what is now North Carolina and Georgia, and from Spain to obviously get the Floridas back. And so America is going to be truncated right there. Jay and John Adams say, "Not so fast, my friend," and they negotiate the deal that we got. He doesn't get credit for that. And then he comes back. He serves in Washington's administration for 2 terms. He's the only man to serve under President Washington for 8 years. Only one. Everyone else resigned.
That's
Jefferson leaves after 4 years, less than 4. Hamilton leaves. Knox leaves. Randolph leaves. Adams sticks around, sticks with him. Now, maybe he had the presidency in mind, but the point is that he was there. And when all these other people left Washington's side, John Adams became his number one advisor. Didn't happen early on, but toward the end of the second administration, it happened. And then John Adams takes over as president, following George Washington. Imagine that. That's a tough act to follow. And it's like following Vince Lombardi. Tough, it's tough to
Oh,
do.
there you go.
And
Literally big, literally and figuratively big feet to shoes to fill there
well,
for
there you
John
go.
Adams.
And so John Adams becomes president number two. By the end of his term, we're in this something called a quasi-war. And the quasi-war was this undeclared war against France. And he worked hard to find a peace, to keep the peace so it didn't go into a full-blown war against the wishes of Hamilton and the other Federalists. And that cost him the election. But once again, Adams knew that maintaining our neutrality was more important than winning the election. And so he loses his second term to Thomas Jefferson, not one of my favorites. I won't go into him too much right now, but and then he goes quietly off to the side, does his thing up in Peacefield. And Thomas Jefferson gets a memorial on the tidal basin, and John Adams largely forgotten. And it's just, but when you balance the two, when you look at the two, the list of accomplishments between the two men, not even close.
No, I agree with you there. I mean, even prior to the revolution, with John Adams representing the British soldiery in the Boston Massacre trials, shows. I mean, the commitments to justice and doing it right. I mean, understanding that was his view. Like, this is a revolution or rebellion, but it's not going to be unruly. And I think we lose that with like the when you compare it to the French Revolution, which, I mean, they're just
Yeah.
going all over the place with it. It's because of gentlemen like John Adams that uh, we're very lucky to have had.
John Adams was one of the most principled men this country has ever known, at least at that high level. And you're right. He was the attorney that helped get those British soldiers off. He was the most popular attorney, the most prosperous attorney in the city of Boston. He didn't have to do that. He knew it would adversely affect his private practice, but he did it anyway because he felt principled. He felt like these guys needed some sort of legal counsel, and no one else would step forward, so he did that. And everything he did was with an eye toward helping the United States. He was once near the end of 1774, mid 1774. He was heading to the First Continental Congress, and he was offered by Jonathan Sewall, the last Attorney General of Massachusetts, Royal Attorney General, a position, a wealthy position, a lucrative position. And John Adams said, no thanks. Sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish, I am with my country. And so he had a lot to lose by going down this path, and yet he did it anyway. And for what it's worth, King George and the ministers in England largely held John Adams responsible for the American Revolution. More than Sam Adams, more than George Washington, they held John Adams responsible. And then, as irony of ironies, who's the first ambassador to the court of St. James? John Adams.
I'm about to say that.
Chilly
There he is,
reception.
walks right in.
Yeah, chilly reception. But
Uh,
so that's my John Adams story. But quite a guy. I'll just say to listeners out there, if you haven't read a biography on John Adams, do so. David McCullough has a great one. James Grant has a great one. And learn about that founding father.
oh, it's just amazing. And the one up that he has on Thomas Jefferson is that at least his house is a national park, Adams National Historical
It
Park.
is.
Yeah, up
Right.
there. And someone did so I'll throw this at you as a listener just said, what about the Alien and Sedition Acts? Was that a besmirch on
Yeah,
Adams?
I have two words to say. Abigail Adams. No, more than that. The Alien and Sedition Acts, it's interesting. The Alien Acts, actually, one of the Alien Acts is still in place today. People don't know about that, but anyway, there were four acts, three Alien Acts and one Sedition Act. And the Alien Acts basically made it more difficult to become a citizen and easier to expel what we thought were dangerous citizens from other countries. And that was the three. No one really complained about them. The Sedition Act, bad idea, so contrary to the First Amendment. It was just a terrible idea. John Adams signed it into law. You know, honestly, you think, what was the guy thinking? Because he was so much a guy that understood the rights and free speech and that sort of thing. And but now, all kidding aside, his number one advisor was Abigail Adams, and she was devoted to John. And she was just incensed at the things that they were saying about John. And she strongly advised him to pass the Sedition Act. He didn't have to follow her advice. He chose to. I think looking back on it, he regretted it. I think that adversely affected what the election. I don't know that it was the deal breaker in the election as much as Hamilton's pamphlet that he wrote just before the election. But yeah, the Sedition Act was it was not a good thing. Uh, Clear violation of First Amendment rights, and no good answer for it. No good answer. What do you think?
No, it's in that it's what you have the of course the quasi war. You have this is going on. I mean, I it's a it is a misstep in a way. You can understand some of the resemblance of it, but one of the things I always hate doing is putting ourselves or using 20th century, 21st century mindsets and putting it on the 18th century. And this is it is slight misstep, yeah. Abigail Adams or the alien sedition group. What is it? Expanding from 10 to 20 years or whatever was the citizenry,
Seven to
but
15 or 7 to 14.
they're 7 to 14. But you're also looking. You're 10 years into this experiment with the Constitution, the second president, first major big controversy without Washington leading. And now you have this Alexander Hamilton guy who's I didn't misquote sometimes saying that he was the Washington 2.0, but you have George Washington
Uh,
there now back as commander in chief of the army. And so Adams and he's Jefferson is not doing anything as vice president. So you have this, you're on an island and sometimes you make these decisions. So is it the best scenario? No. Is it a little besmirch on Adams? But it makes him human. I mean,
well, you're right about that. You know, you think about the help that he had. John Adams retained President Washington's cabinet, not because Adams liked any of them, but because he felt the country needed stability, and he felt like the country would be more comfortable if he kept him. And so he had all these he had these four guys. It was a four-person cabinet at that point. Um, they were not loyal to him. They were loyal to Alexander Hamilton. So he had no support from the cabinet. Charles Lee, the Attorney General, maybe, probably. His vice president was from the opposing party. Thomas Jefferson did nothing to help John Adams, despite Adams doing so much for Jefferson when he was younger and the friendship that he showed him. Very ungrateful man. But anyway, and so Adams is on an island. So who's he talk to? He talks to Abigail. I mean, you raise a great point. We weren't in his shoes, but here's a guy. He's under assault from all sides, including his own party, um, and he made a misstep, made a mistake. Uh, but who hasn't done that, right? We've all made those kind of mistakes, and no one died from it. A couple of people were in prison from it. It's a shame it happened. It's really the one stain, in my opinion, on his administration. The only one.
and and on the same vein, you also have, I think, one of the only stains on George Washington is that the Secretary of War is writing to Washington. They're corresponding right there. And how many times have we did that today? A former secretary writing to the former president about what that president's doing or what's happening in the cabinet. I
Uh,
mean, it would blow up across social media and all that. So, um, yeah, it's a completely different time and time frame, and You can even compare it. Recently got in discussion here in Maryland about Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during 1861. It was during the beside the railroads. It wasn't like the complete state, but we forget that little point. So there are those little points that you were making about these acts, but we take them as a whole and loop them into one big mistake.
Well, and I don't want to beat this dead horse too much, but you think about what happens in time of war, and we were at war. It's called the quasi war. We didn't have peace until 1800 with the Treaty of Fontainebleau, Montefortin, excuse me, Montefortin. And so it was, it was, and you had the habeas corpus thing with Lincoln. We imprisoned, Japanese and Germans in American World War II. In times of war, things are different, and so Adams did this step. I don't think he did it thinking he was going to harm the country. He wouldn't have done that. I think in his heart of hearts, he felt like it would help the country and not harm it. And I don't know if that's an excuse, but but I don't know. I don't think his intention was. I bet his intentions were pure, even if the thought process wasn't that sound.
And I mean, he created one of the. We always talk about the first families of Virginia, the dynasties. His political dynasty. I mean, with his son being president, and then what a grandson who was ambassador to Great Britain during
Yeah.
the other conflict, and so forth. So you have this amazing drama. I mean, must have been a heck of a discussions to have in Braintree with all these
Well,
luminaries.
well, yeah, and his boy was probably the greatest Secretary of State ever. Um, and the another one-term president. And but anyway, that's a story for another day, I suppose.
Maybe that's the third book. Talk about the next Adams coming, right?
Yeah, my goal is to take us all the way through America's first century. To have the next one's going to be on the three theaters in the American Revolution. Then we're going to go with the next three administrations, and then get into Manifest Destiny, and good Lord willing, the creek don't rise. I hope to have 7 or 8 books in a whole series that will take us all the way through to 1876, but we'll see. Lofty ambitions, anyway.
Yeah, you gotta. I mean, that's how the United States is founded, right? On ambition and
There you
ambitious
go.
projects and so forth. So I got a kudos one. Someone did pipe in and say they love reading Americana Corner, so keep doing what you're doing. We also got one interesting comment on. Did you realize that it looks like Washington's going the opposite way, back across, and
Well,
but,
yeah, no one has pointed that out. So good for that person for saying that. It's interesting. It's called artistic license, and we took some of that because it made more sense for Washington to be looking toward the opening of the book rather than toward the spine. And so a bit of artistic license, but thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, good catch.
it's yeah. So people are very astute looking through the book and everything. So you have the three there. They're your top three. If you would pick a fourth, though, this is if you could pick the fourth, who would you have added to make it an even four?
The American Revolution time period.
Yeah,
Oh boy, Phil, don't ask me tough questions like that. I'm supposed to come up with an answer. I don't know. I want to be honest. I don't see. There's a huge drop off in my mind after those three. Um, the Jefferson, Hamilton, Madison triumvirate. Probably most people would pick from that grouping. I don't have a lot to say about those three. I felt they were all Jefferson, Hamilton, especially a bit more self-centered than the other three. Madison, I thought was brilliant, but not a great president. But I would say this: I'm going to pick an oddball one. The other founding father who spent time in that era that I think doesn't get enough writing is John Marshall. John Marshall and James Monroe, those two guys. And so it'd be John Marshall shaped the Supreme Court. He's going to be in book number 3, along with and Monroe will be in book 3. They're phenomenal men. I don't know if you've read much about James Monroe, but there's some great biographies about that. He was he was a Washington type personality with an Adams conviction and honesty, and he would have been unanimously elected in 1820 if it wasn't for one rogue elector who felt it was wrong for someone else other than George Washington to be unanimously elected. But for all intents and purposes, Monroe gets unanimously elected in 1820. Um, he was a great Secretary of State. He um, he became Secretary of War after Washington was burned. I mean, he did phenomenal work. And then James or John Marshall. Read a biography on John Marshall if you want to read about a great American, one of the greatest ever. And people don't hardly know about him today, but he was phenomenal as a leader of the Supreme Court, and his judicial teaching still touches today.
And little known fact is that John Marshall and James Monroe were actually in the first country school together.
They sat
So
side by side. Very good. Very good.
yeah, it's happened part of my National Park Service career. George Washington birthplace, National Monument. Of course, a few miles down the road is James Monroe's birthplace.
Yep.
Um, and one of the things I think that really shapes his world vision and its break with Thomas Jefferson is when he's serving as the ambassador in France and Paris when the French Revolution makes that turn. And
Yep.
Jefferson's not there to see that part of it. Monroe's like, this is nothing like what we did in America. Like
Yep.
they're, and I think that's sets his world scene up to later on when he becomes president with the Monroe Doctrine and so forth, seeing the backing, and then exactly serving as Secretary of State and Secretary of War
Yep.
after John Armstrong, I think it was, said, "Oh, the British aren't coming to the D.C." and
Right.
literally right down the road. So, Monroe is one I always pick when people say. So I'm very glad he's making book, you know, say number three or whatever it is.
Book number three. We'll talk a lot about James Monroe and John Marshall.
Right. And any man that does not bend to current fashion and still wears what knee breeches and buckled shoes is a good man. So
He was the
um,
last one, last founding father in knee breeches.
he is. That's I think it's the title of a great biography. As last founding father or so is a good biography on James Monroe that's out there. Actually got it up here near me as well. So
Now, interesting.
um,
People know about Adams and Jefferson dying on July 4th, 1826. 5 years later, 1831, July 4th, James Madison passes away. Or James Monroe passes away, I mean.
and then I think Madison actually passed away like July 14th or something. I think he lives like a little bit after.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he has to be slightly different. But um
1836. 1836, he passed away. Yeah.
so it's and of course Monroe's house, Ashland, what Highland out there, and the third that gets largely overshadowed by Monticello and Montpelier. But as we come down near the end, we'd like to, of course, round it out by saying, how do they, if people missed it at the beginning, how do they get a copy of the first of what will be a series of books?
On Amazon.com, like everything else these days. And an American Triumph on Amazon is 35 bucks. And I don't want to say too much about it, but it's really like a coffee table quality book in terms of the pictures and so forth. I think it's a good value. That's all I'm going to say.
It certainly is, and we're not just I don't get any kickbacks or anything like that. I'm sitting 3 states away from Tom, so it's not like he's going to come over and wring my neck if I or but no, it is definitely that book that with the pictures, the images, the maps, it comes alive. So I'm very excited to see number two and three, four, five, six come out as well.
Thank you.
Um, but as we wrap up at the top of the hour, so we can get Tom back to watching the NFL
I got it on
here
recording. You got to get all set to
recording. So
go.
thank. No, I'm sorry,
So it's being recorded. We're all set to go.
being recorded and all that. So I want to thank first Tom for persevering through some of the technical difficulties here. Once again, they didn't have this uh, in the 18th century, so we don't have to worry about
Right.
that. The committees of correspondence handled it better. But before I do leave, one more great comment just came in from Melissa, who says she found the videos recently and she uses her Your Americana Corner videos in her classroom. So there you go.
Oh,
They're making it right into, and she is, I know, a proud supporter of the American Battlefield Trust and Preservation, and is a great history teacher. So,
No, thank you,
uh,
Melissa. And honestly, that's why I'm doing this stuff so that you can teach Americans about our great nation's past. And yeah, that makes me feel good. Thank you for that comment.
So leave with that on a high note there. So we once again thank Tom for joining us, especially on the first Sunday here. So we start off 2024 on a high note. So you set the bar high, Tom. So the rest of the referees have to
I
match
don't know
this one.
about that, but thank you.
Um, in addition, if you are for in 2 weeks, we'll be back again here on Sunday night. We're actually talking to author Paul and historian Paul Lockhart, who wrote a book, "Their Whites, the Whites of Their Eyes." So we'll be talking about Bunker Hill as we move into the 250th of the American Revolution. Also, make sure you check out America in the Corner. I'll drop it in the chat here so everyone can get the URL. But once again, thank you, Tom. Thank you all for our listeners. We'll see you in 2 weeks here back on Rev War Reverie. Have a
Thank
good
you,
night,
Phil.
everyone.
It's been great.